Glory to Jesus Christ. Today is Monday, January 16th, and this will be the first of 6 installments in our Bible study that we're doing about the gospel readings for the first 3 days of Holy Week. And so the gospel that we will hear today, we will read in church this year on April 9th, Sunday, April 9th at 7 o'clock at the first bridegroom matin service. And that's the first service of Holy Week. The gospel we'll read at that service is Matthew 21:18 to 43. And if we take this gospel, we can actually split it into two distinct parts. And the second part is a parable that we hear at other times during the year. So when we read the commentary today from the Blessed Theophylact, we're going to focus on solely the first part of the gospel itself, which is something that we don't hear in the regular lectionary. And also, just in the matter of time, if we had to go through the whole thing, it would take too much time to be able to do that. So again, we'll break this gospel into two parts. Remember that we'll meet then on Wednesday at the church after the Akathist. So the Akathist starts at 6:30 p.m. and then roughly 7:05 or so, we'll start a discussion in the church hall about what we've heard and what we've read. And I can give some more context about it as well with connecting it into the bridegroom services and everything. So, but our goal today is to read the gospel that we'll hear that first day of Holy Week and to read the commentary by the Blessed Theophylact. So here's the gospel, Matthew 21:18 to 43. Now in the morning, as he returned to the city, he was hungry. And seeing a fig tree by the road, he came to it and found nothing on it but leaves, and said to it, "Let no fruit grow on you ever again." Immediately the fig tree withered away. And when the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, "How did the fig tree wither away so soon?" Jesus answered and said to them, "Assuredly I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what was done to the fig tree, but also if you say to this mountain, 'Be removed and be cast into the sea,' it will be done. And whatever things you ask in prayer, believing, you will receive." Now when he came into the temple, the chief priests and elders of the people confronted him as he was teaching, and said, "By what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you this authority?" But Jesus answered and said to them, "I also will ask you one thing, which if you tell me, I likewise will tell you by what authority I do these things. The baptism of John, where was it from? From heaven or from men?" And they reasoned among themselves, saying, "If we say from heaven, he will say to us, 'Why then did you not believe him?' But if we say from men, we fear the multitude, for all count John as a prophet." So they answered Jesus and said, "We do not know." And he said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. But what do you think? A man had 2 sons, and he came to the first and said, 'Son, go work today in my vineyard.' He answered and said, 'I will not.' But afterward he regretted it and went. Then he came to the second and said likewise. And he answered and said, 'I go, sir,' but he did not go. Which of the two did the will of his father? They said to him, the first. Jesus said to them, 'Assuredly I say to you, that tax collectors and harlots enter the kingdom of God before you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But tax collectors and harlots believed him. And when you saw it, you did not afterward relent and believe him.' Hear another parable. There was a certain landowner who planted a vineyard and set a hedge around it, dug a winepress in it, and built a tower. And he leased it to vine dressers and went into a far country. Now when vintage time drew near, he sent his servants to the vine dressers that they might receive its fruit. And the vine dressers took his servants, beat one, killed one, and stoned another. Again he sent other servants, more than the first, and they did likewise to them. Then last of all he sent his son to them, saying, 'They will respect my son.' But when the vine dressers saw the son, they said among themselves, 'This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and seize his inheritance. So they took him and cast him out of the vineyard and killed him. Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those vine dressers? They said to him, He will destroy those wicked men miserably and lease his vineyard to other vine dressers who will render to him the fruits in their seasons. Jesus said to them, Have you never read in the Scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone? This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken from you and given to a nation bearing the fruits of it. So that's the gospel that we hear at the first bridegroom matins of Holy Week. So we're going to read again. We're going to break it into two halves and read from the Blessed Theophylact. I hope you can see that. This is the book of his commentary of the Gospel of Matthew. It's probably helpful if you, while you're listening to this, if you have the Gospel in front of you, and as you listen to the commentary from the Blessed Theophylact. So the first portion, the first 3 verses, we'll read first. Now in the morning, as he returned to the city, he was hungry, and seeing a fig tree by the road, he came to it and found nothing on it but leaves, and said to it, Let no fruit grow on you ever again. Immediately the fig tree withered away, and when the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, How did the fig tree wither away so soon? So this is verses 18 through 20 in chapter 21 of Matthew. And Blessed Theophylact, he writes about these verses. Of the many miracles which the Lord performed, all were done to do good, for he performed no miracles of chastisement. Therefore, lest anyone think that he is unable to chastise, here he shows this power as well, not applied to men, but to a tree, as he loves mankind. He also did the same on a previous occasion to the swine. He withers the tree, then, in order to chasten men. The disciples marvel, and with good reason, for the fig tree contains a great amount of sap, and so the fact that it withered immediately serves all the more to indicate the miracle. The fig tree means the synagogue of the Jews, which has only leaves, that is, the visible letter of the law, but not the fruit of the Spirit. But also every man who gives himself over to the sweetness of the present life is likened to a fig tree, who has no spiritual fruit to give to Jesus, who is hungry for such fruit, but only leaves, that is, temporal appearances which fall away and are gone. This man then hears himself cursed. For Christ says, Go you accursed into the fire. But he is also dried up, for as he roasts in the flame, his tongue is parched and withered like that of the rich man of the parable, who in his life had ignored Lazarus. The next section we hear is verses 21 to 22. So Jesus answered and said to them, Assuredly I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what was done to the fig tree, but also if you say to this mountain, Be removed and be cast into the sea, it will be done. Whatever things you ask in prayer, believing, you will receive. So here's what the Theophylact has to say. Great is the promise which Christ makes to his disciples, the ability to move mountains. If only we are not ambiguous in faith, that is, we do not hesitate. Whatever we ask unhesitantly, believing in God's power, we shall receive. One might ask, and if I ask for something unprofitable and foolishly believe that God will give me this, will I indeed receive this unprofitable thing? How is it that God is said to love mankind if he would fulfill my unprofitable request? Listen then. First, when you hear faith, you should understand that it means not foolish faith, but true faith. And when you hear prayer, understand it to mean that prayer which asks for things profitable, such as the Lord gave to us when he said, Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one, and petitions of similar nature. Then consider the words, Doubt not. For how could a man who is united with God as one and not divided or separated from him, how could that man ask for something unprofitable? So if you are undivided and inseparable from God, then you will ask for and receive things which are profitable for you. And so doubt not, it means not to be divided. And then the next section, verses 23 through 27. Now when he came into the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people confronted him as he was teaching and said, "By what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you this authority?" But Jesus answered and said to them, "I also will ask you one thing, which if you tell me, I likewise will tell you by what authority I do these things. The baptism of John, where was it from heaven or from men?" And they reasoned among themselves, saying, "If we say from heaven, he will say to us, why then did you not believe him? But if we say from men, we fear the multitude, for all count John as a prophet." So they answered Jesus and said, "We do not know." And he said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things." Theophylact comments, full of spite that he had expelled the peddlers from the temple, the teachers of the law approached and asked him such things as these: "Who are you to cast out from the temple those who do business there? As a priest do you do this? But you have no priestly office. As a king then? But neither are you a king, and even if you were, you would not have the authority to do such things. For it is not permitted for kings to do these things in the temple." They were questioning the Lord in this manner, so that if he should say, "By my own authority I do them," they could accuse him of insurrection, because he said that he had his own authority. But if he said, "I do these things by divine authority," they would draw away from him the multitudes who were praising him as God, telling them, "Look, he is not God, but he does these things by God's authority as a servant." How then does Christ, who is himself wisdom, respond? He seizes the sophists in their cunning and asks them the same questions concerning John, so that if they said the teaching of John was from heaven, their rejection of John's teachings would mark them as enemies of God. But if they said that the teaching of John was of men, they would be in danger from the multitudes, for they all considered John a prophet. The Lord shows us here that we ought not to answer those who ask a question with malicious intent. For he himself did not reply to those Jews who questioned him with cunning, although he was not at a loss for an answer. At the same time, we learn that it is not Christ's nature to extol himself. Behold, then, the Lord who is able to say by what authority he does these things, but does not say, lest he appear to extol himself. And then verses 28 through 32, "But what do you think? A man had 2 sons, and he came to the first and said, 'Son, go work today in my vineyard.' He answered and said, 'I will not.' But afterward he regretted it and went. Then he came to the second and said likewise. And he answered and said, 'I go, sir,' but he did not go. Which of the 2 did the will of his father? They said to him, the first. Jesus said to them, 'Assuredly I say to you, that tax collectors and harlots enter the kingdom of God before you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But tax collectors and harlots believed him. And when you saw it, you did not afterward relent and believe him.'" And so Theophylact comments, he introduces 2 types of men. One type are those who promised from the beginning. Such were the Jews who said, "All which God spoke we will do, and we will obey." The other type are those who disobeyed. Such are the publicans and the harlots, but also the people of the Gentiles, who from the beginning were not obedient to the will of God, but later they repented and obeyed. Behold then the wisdom of Christ. He did not at once from the start say to them, "The publicans and the harlots are better than you," but first he got the upper hand over them, and they confessed that of the 2 sons, he who did the will of the Father was the obedient one. And when they had so confessed, he led them on and said, John came in the way of righteousness, that is, with a blameless life, and you are not able to say that his life was reprehensible. Yet the harlots obeyed him, while you did not. Therefore they precede you, that is, they enter before you into the kingdom. So you also should struggle to believe, so that you might at least enter in after the harlots. For if you do not believe, you will by no means enter. There are many to this very day who have promised to God their Father to become monks or priests, but afterwards were negligent in their promise. But there are others who did not promise to lead a monastic or priestly life, but now they are monks and priests. So the obedient sons are those who act, although they promised nothing. And so that leads us then to the parable that again we hear in other times throughout the year. So we'll stop there with the commentary from Theophylact. So you can already hear that there's so many wonderful things that he has to teach us as we listen to these Gospels. And then we can add a layer onto it as we hear it and put that in time in Holy Week as well. Theophylact is not doing that. He's just commenting on the text itself. And then we can add that layer to it of when we hear the gospel in the rhythm and cycle of the church itself. So again, hopefully folks will be able to join us on Wednesday and chat more about this with some questions. And I'll have some more things to add on to it. And then the week after, we'll pick up from the gospel of the pre-sanctified liturgy of Holy Monday morning. Glory to Jesus Christ.